Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in Mind.
Just before we hit record, you and I were talking about we were talking about timelines between and how we got back into gaming.
Yep.
And one of the things I picked up about a year before you reached out and said, I think we should do this, or think I'm interested in doing this, is I went to the gaming store and they had a lot of stuff for 3.5.
Yeah.
3.5e out on sale.
Yep.
And stuff that was even 3.5e 3.5e OGL, open gaming license. And there was just a small little pile of books by, ironically, Green Ronin.
Yep.
That was my introduction to them.
Yep.
And it was for a gaming system called True 20.
Yeah.
And I did not understand. This was before we started talking about it. I went to the store on a whim, I think. I think I was looking for something for a board game at the time, and I got into the books, and I'm like, wow, there's this open gaming thing, and you can play this in the past, the present, or the future. You know, there's books on, you know, and it's very simple in terms of skills and things like that. This is great. And the books were on sale. So I picked up, it was like 4 books. It wasn't expensive.
Right.
And I read through them, and I remember thinking to myself, wow, this is fascinating how this gentleman and the team that worked with him developed this gaming system. Now we're going to find out soon enough that it really was output of something else. True 20, you know, chicken or the egg. True 20 didn't come first. It came later. After something else.
Yep.
But this was something I think we had talked about just real briefly before you had gotten back into it. But you brought up something interesting about, you know, we've known each other 30 years.
And somehow, as Thanksgiving season approaches, it will be 6 years since I got back into gaming and reached out to you and reached out to our friend Brian and said, hey, any chance you want to do this? And somehow in the previous 24 years, as close as we are, we almost never talked RPGing. We had never played together, not even close. I had no idea you had a history with D&D. You had a history of familiarity with a bunch of games out there. As a kid, you were doing it even before I was introduced to it by our friend Scott. It just never came up, which seems statistically impossible, if not improbable. And yet,
we talked recreation. I mean, we talked cycling, bicycling. We talked, you know, outdoor activities. You know, we don't do this here because it's a nice change of pace for us, but we would get into some pretty heavy topics about politics and faith and everything. So it was like you said, this was like it seems unusually odd that, and especially because of our interest and love of sci-fi, that we never talked about role-playing and sci-fi.
You know, and I think for the longest time, I had almost repressed my interests. Like I always loved playing. Even you know, even to this day, especially if I'm watching something with Star Wars, I'll wonder if something, you know, amazing happens. It's like, I wonder what you'd have to roll for that. Although nowadays I would be wondering that with the Genesis narrative dice system, maybe even 5e. Back in the day, it was the D6, right, from West End. And that never left me. But I mean, let's face it, you know, the last time I had played prior was I mean, I was in grad school. It was the late 90s. I mean, it was not hip to role play. That was a lot, and we were trying to be professional and trying to learn and trying to get into life.
The internet didn't give us the internet didn't give us this window into the fact that
that's right,
such a diverse group of people played.
Yep.
And so
Yep.
we were going off of, or at least I was going off of preconceived ideas from 1985 or 86 that,
Yep.
You grew out of this.
Exactly. And I was 40. I mean, 6 years ago, we were 42. And I remember it had been coming for a while. And I finally decided, to heck with this. I miss it. And I never stopped thinking about it over close to 20 years of absence.
Yeah.
And I just decided that's it. I'm in my 40s. Screw this. I'm doing what I love to do, whether that's recreationally or professionally.
Now you're going to have to flag it as explicit.
I don't think we have to for that.
Okay.
I don't think that's sufficiently naughty.
Okay. Well, I could.
Listeners,
you
chime
would actually,
in. Let us know.
You would beep it out or edit it, but it's funny that because I think we both found who ultimately became our wives in the latter part of the 90s.
That was a tortuous way to explain that, but true.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I was trying to do it in a way that allowed
we were
for the
both
fact
equally
that,
surprised that we found wives.
exactly,
and, as were many others.
And how relatively inept we were at
interesting use of the past tense, but go on.
Yes. Yeah. How inept we were. So once that came around too, and then marriage and then kids, it just didn't come up. I mean, you moved off. We would talk regularly,
and we talked about even sci-fi and fantasy, all the stuff in like on screen and books.
But we never talked like we're doing now. Folks that listen know we Zoom call this, but we obviously release audio. But we didn't even have that back in the day. Or messenger. We would maybe group email, group message, not even text message. That was before SMS really became popular.
It was ICQ back in the day, but
or AIM.
So we're drifting. AIM,
so point being, a year before, maybe a little more, I got into this True 20 and I was fascinated by it. And we've discussed this idea of RPG material as lit. And I read through all this True 20 stuff, picked up another couple books through Amazon and through some of the book resellers out there. And I was really into it. And then you showed interest, and then we went down the path we've talked about.
But early on, once we started talking, you started putting a bug in my ear about, have you seen this True 20? Have you seen this True 20? And I didn't know anything about 3.5e. I'd never played, I once played D&D at a sleepover when I was in junior high, or maybe it was 6th grade, right? I didn't know anything about D&D or Pathfinder. I didn't, and so you were all excited, and I had no real basis of comparison. It looked neat, but it's like, well, it's not Star Wars, so I'm not yet interested.
Yeah, well, that was and we talked about how, you were reluctant but willing to try going into high fantasy.
I was reluctant. It took forever for you to get me into Pathfinder.
Yeah. So, but point is so I've had this True 20 stuff. I've come back to it a lot because it's we've talked about Savage Worlds. We've talked about Fate. We've talked about the sandbox at Genesis. True 20 is in effect a very lean, really just a slick version of a D20 system. And right on the cover, it says designed by Steve Kenson. I have the book in my hand. So for the original first edition, there's original and there's revised. I have the original in right up here on my desk. So when we were out in the Twitterverse, and when our friends at Green Ronin got in contact with us, we've had Malcolm Shepard on with us a couple times. Malcolm, you have to come back. Troy, bring Malcolm back. When our friend Troy, Green Ronin, said, well, we can, maybe Steve would be willing to join you. I was
you were excited. Yeah.
I was excited just because because of his connection to my interest in returning to gaming.
Yeah.
So, just so being able to have Steve here, talking about his experience with Green Ronin, with Mutants and Masterminds and Blue Rose, and then his new one that he has going through Patreon.
Yep.
Twilight Accord, The Fallen City. We're going to talk about that with him.
Cool.
Yeah. So, patreon.com/Twilight Accord. We'll have all the notes there, but you'll find, when we talk to him, we'll talk about Twilight Accord a bit, and it has, I don't want to give anything away. There is a broad-based appeal to it.
Oh, it's so clever. Yeah. And so important. But also it was neat hearing from Steve regarding the history of Green Ronin as an RPG publisher right there. I mean, we consider them friends of the podcast. They're one of our favorite publishers. They do some really diverse things, not just monolithic in their focus. And so to hear from Steve, who has been writing RPGs, what was it, since 1995?
Yeah.
Or writing 4 RPGs at least.
Well, he even was talking about even earlier than that when he was younger.
Right. Sorry, being published as a writer of material since 95, and right when he was in college, and what did he say? Being the second actual employee of Green Ronin.
Yeah, so beyond the three
beyond the founders, right?
Yeah,
and so to hear the history of the company. Because I don't think, just like us, I don't think many people in RPG land are necessarily familiar with just how much of an impact Green Ronin has had on the gaming industry and what a lot of us do at the table. But like you said, it was a really interesting conversation to hear from someone who has so much history in the industry and has developed so many games that are iterative of one another and at the same time being really quite disparate. It's a really, really interesting broad portfolio. And again, the one he's working on now on Patreon, it just sounds so interesting.
Yeah, and you'll hear us. I wanted to walk back into his history, but we really wanted to hear about Twilight Accord.
Yep.
So we probably didn't spend as much time as we wanted to, but we wanted to be cognizant of his time.
Yeah, it was getting late for him.
It was getting late, and so we asked him to come back because we'd love to talk more about it as they progress.
Yeah, we will definitely be having Steve back when Twilight Accord comes out. There's going to be a lot to talk about.
Yes. Yeah.
So with that, we are very pleased to bring you our chat with Steve. Steve Kenson has been a professional RPG author and designer since 1995 and has worked on numerous books and games, including the award-winning Mutants and Masterminds, Freedom City, and Blue Rose for Green Ronin Publishing. He has written 9 RPG tie-in novels and runs his own imprint, Ad Infinitum Adventures, which publishes material for Icons Superpowered Roleplaying. He helped found the annual Queer as a 3-sided die panel series at Gen Con. Steve lives in Salem, New Hampshire with his partners, Adam and Christopher, and maintains a website and blog at stevekenson.com.
Steve, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
No, my pleasure.
We've got a lot to talk about, and I want to get to us talking about Twilight Accord because you're in a funding phase for that right now, and we'll have all the information out there on the show notes. But before that, if you don't mind, let's back up and talk about so obviously you've been writing RPGs and so on in some form or another since the mid-90s.
Yeah. I just recently realized that this year is the 30th, my 30th anniversary as a published RPG author.
Wow.
How did you get started doing it?
Well, I mean, I was a very avid gamer in high school and later in college. And I wasn't quite the forever DM of the game group, but I was definitely the one who ran a lot of games, and would bring whatever new game was out to my group and be like, we have to play this. And so I was very active as a gamer. And in the early 90s and the dark ages of the internet, I was involved in some online gamer forums.
Wow.
I happened to do some playtesting for the second edition of Shadowrun, which my game group was crazy about at the time. I was definitely one of those playtesters who was very enthusiastic and had a lot of suggestions. But apparently, at least a few of them were decent because Tom Dowd, who was the Shadowrun developer at the time, ended up using some stuff that I pitched and posted and eventually when he had a freelancer drop out on a small project, he asked if I wanted to write it. It was like a 1,000-word essay, but I jumped to the chance, and I labored over it. It's probably the most work I've ever put into 1,000 words. That started me off on the process of picking up freelance work, writing initially for Shadowrun, later for Earth Dawn, also from FASA. And I began branching out from there. A couple of years, 2 or 3 years later, I decided I was going to quit the corporate day job that I hated and write full time.
Wow. Okay, so I'm just curious, approximately how old were you when you got that first gig?
I was 23.
Yeah, I mean, just to put that in perspective for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, what an incredible thing.
Yeah.
And we're right, and we're all here on in this. We're relatively close in age.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So
Gen
I can.
Xers.
Yeah. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So I can imagine, just going back to that point, getting involved in that type of stuff. You had to, you had to throw the dart really, really good to hit that bullseye to be able to get involved in that. Unlike now, where we can talk to someone, Jason and I can actually meet and talk to someone who does game development and all that. It probably wasn't as easy to do that.
The only way I met people in the industry was by going to conventions.
Sure.
Back then.
Okay.
Wow.
What was the landscape like? What was the landscape like for conventions at that point, so early in your career? I mean, like you said, it wasn't pre-internet, but it was close.
It was pretty close, yeah. I mean, it was in some ways. It was less so than it is now,
right?
When it seems like there's a major convention everywhere all the time.
Yeah.
And Gen Con and Origins were the big linchpins, of the convention season, and certainly of the tabletop industry as far as that went. I started going to Gen Con when I was 18.
Okay.
And I have been to every Gen Con since but 2.
Wow.
Which unfortunately does not beat Chris Pramus's record, who started going when he was 19 and has never missed a Gen Con.
Wow.
So I lost that out to him the first time I missed one.
And on the flip side, embarrassingly, just because of everything that Jace, I know you have, and I haven't hit one yet, but
we are convention virgins. And,
yes,
totally.
Yeah. So now that the pandemic's over, we're deciding as to when we're doing it. We're hoping like 2023. That's what we're guessing.
I did have I think I told you this, Brett. I did have my first opportunity to go to a con next month, and actually sit on a panel. And it's like, I can't just, no, thanks. I neither have the time nor the money, but next round.
Well, and I live here in Milwaukee where Gen Con used to be before it moved. So I remember when it would be downtown, I was working downtown, and everyone would flock to, Jason almost flock to Grand Avenue and all that, where there were restaurants and food courts, and everyone would swing through there as they came through. And a lot of people you would know because they dressed the part, others didn't. And we have Gary Con here for D&D, which is about an hour south of us. And at some point, but when you and I got back into this, Jason, it was right before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
So,
but they're picking up now. I mean, look at like you said, Steve. I mean, they're all over. I mean, you see the reports, and man, it's back.
Yeah, I am freshly back from Gen Con just over like a week and a half ago, and the attendance was over 50,000.
Oh my god! Wow.
And I love hearing that just things are returning. There's a sense of normalcy.
What I was seeing online was that it was handled by most pretty well. Is that legit? Like people were taking care of things?
That was my experience. I mean, Gen Con had a mask and proof of vaccination mandate.
Oh wow. Okay.
So you had to, show your vax card and get a wristband. And it was masks on the convention center at all times.
Nice.
So those rules were very strictly observed as far as I saw. So
that's great. Yeah.
We tend to avoid politics, but that was one of the political things that I know you and I have talked about, Jace, just because now granted we both have come out of COVID this summer, but luckily
I mean that's not politics, that's just science. But
I know, but
get back to the
unfortunately
point.
they merge. But okay, so sorry, I like we told you, Steve, when we started, this tends to get a little organic and we tend to go off on tangents.
Organic.
Yeah. So you got it. Ultimately, at some point, you ended up partnering with Green Ronin.
Yes. So in the very late 90s, early 2000s, I had become friends with Nicole Lindrus and Chris Pramus, two of the three partners of Green Ronin. And we knew each other from the convention circuit and talked online and the like. Chris was working for Wizards of the Coast at the time, and third edition D&D was in the works. And so Chris decided to be one of the first adopters of the open game license, and designed and published the adventure Death in Freeport as one of the first third-party third edition D&D adventures. It was released at the same Gen Con as third edition D&D. And that launched Green Ronin Publishing. So I initially did some freelancing for Green Ronin as the sort of open game license era was taking off, and wrote a few source books for them. And around that time, I had designed a superhero setting that I had started working on a few years prior as a freelance project that fell through. The publisher decided that they weren't going to publish it, and so the work reverted to me. And I kind of kept working on it as a side project just for fun. And I was talking with Chris about it, and I was just like, at this particular time, it was a strange fallow time in the industry for superhero games, because there was just nothing at the time. And I was basically complaining that I had this superhero setting, and I was like, there's no publisher I can pitch it to because nobody's publishing a superhero RPG right now. And Chris was like, well, can I take a look at it? And I said, sure, I'll send you the draft. And he read it and he said, well, I'll tell you what, I think it's really good. If you want to design a superhero game, using the open game license, something D20 based, we'll talk a 2-book deal. We'll do a rule book and we'll do your setting book.
Wow.
And we'll see how it goes, basically. And that project is what turned into Mutants and Masterminds and the first edition of the Freedom City source book.
That's really interesting. And I just want to go back for a second and just note for everybody how just nonchalantly you're like, and I wrote a few source books and blah 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 blah. Like I just spent a little time creating entire worlds, several of them, and then I got serious. I just want to point that out of how minimalist that comment came across when the amount of work must have been just massive.
I'm moving around as I do, because my introduction to Steve was some work that he did with this.
Oh yeah.
Brad's been talking about that for I think first few years.
For a few years.
Official Green Ronin projects. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So
but Brad, since we're an audio podcast, maybe you want to tell
I was going to get that
what we're actually looking at,
because I'm jumping ahead in the story, because you talked about Mutants and Masterminds, and then after that comes obviously Blue Rose, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the mechanic you used for Mutants and Masterminds ultimately became, I don't know, and I'll be honest with you, I can't remember off the top of my head. It in effect was its own mechanic through the OGL, right?
Well, yeah. The key thing, and I think you're referring to the toughness check mechanic for damage, most likely. One of the big departures that Mutants and Masterminds made from the D20 SRD was the way it handled damage, essentially like a kind of saving throw, essentially. And the degree of success or failure on the check determined the sort of effect of the damage. Because I played around with mechanics for doing superheroes with the D20 system, and I was not a big fan. Maybe I was probably traumatized by playing a lot of champions in college, but I was not a big fan of characters having to roll 12 to 15 6 or 8 sided dice to determine how much damage they did.
Right.
With an attack, especially when they were going to do that routinely. It's one thing if it's your character's big spectacular thing, but if like every punch you throw is 12d6 damage, that just gets to be a real drag. And so I was like, is there another way I can do this? And I came up with, and I looked at how the D20 system handled other hazards, and I was like, oh well, there's saving throws for other things. Why don't we make damage a saving throw? And I pitched that idea to Chris, and the key thing was that we needed to produce the game under the open game license and not the D20 license at the time, because it would no longer be compatible with the requirements that D20 required. And Chris was okay with that. He thought, he agreed with my reasoning, and that it was a better mechanic for the game. So we went with it.
And you ended up publishing, in effect, that the gaming system, I guess is the right term. I don't know what it was, and that's what I was holding up before, folks. You can't see it, but I was holding up a chunk of my collection of the True 20 gaming system books that I have from Green Ronin.
Well, I mean, when you excitedly shared this True 20 thing with me again at least 3 years ago.
Longer, probably like 6.
Probably when we got back into RPGing. I think it was the elegance of the mechanic that drew you in, right? Compared to what you'd seen elsewhere, because you were looking for something that hit that right balance of crunchiness and elegance. And True 20, you were very keen on it.
And you're not, and I'm not the one being interviewed. I don't want to take Steve out of it, but there's the you have the different adventure settings that came with it, and the original 4. And then there were 5, and Jason, you and I were just talking about engines and gaming and all that. And True 20 always comes back to me. And I know Steve, correct me if I'm wrong. Again, this is organic. We're all over the place. They're pushing out, or they're putting back out a lot of the True 20 stuff out on Drive-Thru RPG, if I remember or heard correctly.
We are making the True 20 stuff has always been available on Drive-Thru. The difference is that we're now making some print on demand editions available.
Nice. Okay.
Okay. So True 20, and we could talk about that for hours, that and Mutants and Masterminds. And Steve, you actually need to go and spend time off the computer at some point, so we'll try to keep it succinct. But Mutants and Masterminds, and in effect Blue Rose, kind of begat True 20 in a way, because you ended up publishing that. What did you kind of work on? Did you spend time in that realm for a while, or what kind of came along with that or after it?
Well, the way it ended up working out was that Mutants and Masterminds, it turned out, did well, and Green Ronin decided to hire me full time to develop it as a full-fledged game line. So this was 2004-ish, 2003. And so I came on board. I was Green Ronin's second employee.
Jeez.
Wow.
After our webmaster Evan, other than the three partners, who were obviously doing most of the work at the company at the time. My primary mandate was to develop M&M as a full line. But Blue Rose was actually the first Green Ronin project that landed on my desk as an employee, because it was one of those things that Chris thought had a lot of promise, but didn't have any time to really work on. So I was assigned to work with the editor who was working on Blue Rose to get the manuscript into shape, who was Jeremy Crawford.
Wow.
Blue Rose was Jeremy's first RPG project.
Oh, wow.
He was working in academic tech support at the time. He and I started the process of collaborating on Blue Rose, and it was also the beginning of our friendship.
Nice.
We would talk for hours. Part of that development process was basically whether or not making the decision whether or not we wanted Blue Rose to be a D&D supplement, essentially, or a standalone game, which is what we later went with. And that involved the idea of, hey, maybe we can, if we want this to be a standalone game and for it to have some simpler mechanics in some aspects, we can import some of these things we did with Mutants and Masterminds. And and that led to a lot of people, liked Blue Rose for the setting. A lot of people liked Blue Rose for the mechanics. There were a lot of people like, are you going to do something more with these mechanics? And Green Ronin was like, well, we could. And so that spun off into the idea of basically taking the mechanics and building an independent engine. And that became True 20, essentially.
Wow.
Oh, interesting.
Let me fast forward just because I want to be cognizant of your time and such.
Sure.
You've been, so obviously that you're now at a point where you've been working on a game that is I don't know how to put this. That's in the funding phase right now. You're on Kickstarter.
Patreon.
Patreon. Sorry. Patreon. See, that's why I said funding.
That was my bad. I said Kickstarter before we were.
But Twilight Accord, The Fallen City. So how did you come up with this as a game and an environment and so on?
So the genesis of Twilight Accord started with Joe Carricker, who's a fellow Ronin and is primary developer on Blue Rose now for Green Ronin. And Joe was the author of a superhero novel called Sacred Band. That's about a team of queer superheroes in a world where essentially being a superhero is illegal, unless you work for the government. And it has a lot of interesting things to say about basically what happens when these queer characters who have power decide that their community is threatened and someone needs to do something about it, and that someone is them. And that concept is kind of the seed of what eventually became Twilight Accord. And Joe and I talked quite a bit back and forth about the notion of inclusion in RPGs, and particularly of queer inclusion. And we talked about the key thing that again led us to Twilight Accord was that there's a significant difference between inclusion and having a story that focuses on queer characters and their stories. I'm all for inclusion. I'm glad to see a lot more of it. But there's a difference between, hey, this NPC happens to be gay or trans, and is completely accepted in this setting in society, and isn't that great? And these are queer heroes, and this is their story.
I mean, it's the risk for tokenization, right? The minimizing of representation. It's always present. It's like, oh yeah, and they're this, but that's not the same as what you did.
Sure. And so, and that's basically the high concept of Twilight Accord was to do a D&D fantasy story that focuses on queer people.
That's really cool.
Have you like it indicated you're running it off, it's going to be based off of the 5e engine. So how do you see it when you wrote it? Is it in effect self-contained on 5e, or is it, how does it fit? I guess I just want to.
Well, basically our concept for Twilight Accord is a combination of a setting and a campaign, very much like the great majority of the books that Wizards of the Coast has produced for D&D 5e. It's a collection of adventures that will take characters at least to first to 15th level, and it's the context of the setting in which those adventures take place. So just like the Ghost of Saltmarsh is a campaign and also is focused on this nautical community and everything involving it. Twilight Accord is a campaign series of adventures, and it's focused on this particular locale that we call the Fallen City.
I mean, Brad and I have talked about this, on the podcast, but tons offline this past year. But I think one of the things I appreciate and I respect most about the RPG community, kind of writ large, is how truly progressive and welcoming it's becoming, right? Like you look at not to get on a soapbox for a sec, but you look at everything going on in society right now, and a lot of days it's like, wait, what just happened? How are we here again?
Right.
And then you look at, different elements, is including in pop culture and whatnot, like Star Trek, because it's been like 40 minutes and we haven't said that yet. But still, like, it's like, oh, look at that. But then you look at games like what you're doing on Twilight Accord, you look at publishers like Green Ronin, who are just stepping out in front and saying, look, there are solutions to this, and we're going to create them, and we're not going to wait for the rest of the world. They can catch up, right? I mean, it's just a really cool, beautiful thing. And it's neat that it's happening in areas like RPGs. And like, as cool as Twilight Accord is for queer players and GMs, right? As a heteronormative guy, I think, my God, the potential for people like me to play in this game is really significant too, right? Where it's like, oh well, why wouldn't I pick up this game and play it, right? I mean, this is potentially world-changing stuff, table by table.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've always thought that one of the powerful effects of role playing is the opportunity to empathize and literally, well, not metaphorically, spend some time in someone else's life,
right?
As far as that goes, and to play a different character, to be someone else, and get a sense of what other lives are like.
Yeah.
If you don't mind me asking, and all this comes across well, obviously you've got support and everything from Green Ronin on this.
Yep.
And it's out on Patreon, not Kickstarter, Jason. And I know I just had to twist. What have you seen in terms of feedback from individuals as you develop it and as it came out and became public out on Patreon?
Yeah.
Generally, things have been very positive. Given the nature of Patreon, we have created a bit of a walled garden for ourselves in that folks who sign up are pretty much supportive of the notion,
right.
And they're signing on to be supportive, of this. They're literally putting their money where their mouth is as far as that goes. So we've generally seen enthusiastic support from the patrons. It's a little challenging in terms of getting folks involved, just because it's a very slow development process, and folks are getting a real sort of behind the scenes look at how the sausage gets made in this. And unlike Kickstarter, ironically, Kickstarter, which was intended to be a way of sort of generating seed money to launch a project, nowadays pretty much only works if you come to them with something that's already done. The most experience has shown, and metrics tell us, that the most successful Kickstarters are ones that basically have concept art and sample pages, and this is what it's going to look like, and this is the complete quick start preview, and here's a 5-minute video detailing everything about the product, and basically all sorts of stuff that we're nowhere near the stage of having yet. So if you really want a Kickstarter to be successful, you have to really present a really complete, really cool, interesting package, not just a really cool idea. Patreon allows us a little bit more long time to work with a community of patrons, get their input, show them progress month to month, week to week on things. And it's not quite so much, okay, give us all the money up front, we're going to disappear for a year, and at some point you'll get a book.
I was this 2 years ago now. I was literally the second person to fund a Kickstarter for a book, and I still stand by. I'm happy to do it, but it's and good people who are doing it, going to be a great product. But it's exactly what you said. Of it's, we've got the money now, but it's taking time, and there's nothing in the interim.
I mean, I still refer to Kickstarters as gifts from my past self, because every once in a while a book will show up in the mail, and I'll be like, what's this?
Oh, funny.
And I'll be like, oh, that's right, it's that thing I kickstarted 12 months ago.
It's your time machine.
I totally forgot this thing even existed, but here it is. Yay, thanks, past me.
And on Patreon, do you find that affects I hate to put it this way, but do you find that affects either positively or negatively your sense of commitment around the project and making, doing things timely, or is it just you're bringing more people on the journey?
I actually find, well, personally, I find Patreon is actually really helpful in terms of, because there's a set regular deadline, and we're doing things on a monthly basis. We have a schedule to keep to.
Nice.
For me, that keeps me more on track than this vague sort of, okay, we've got all the money, now let's do this thing.
And I know,
cool.
I mean, just because when we knew that you were actually willing to subject yourself to us, but you could join. I mean, you could in effect subscribe. You can join for just $2 a month, and you continually get the updates.
Oh,
and everything. It's So I mean, in all honesty,
everyone listening should do this at least at the counselor level.
Yeah, right. I belong to a few of them, and it's great to see the talk that you all have on the progress, challenges, successes, some of the material and all that. And I think to Jason's point, and please, you can give me that, since no one can see it, you can give me the verbal cues. I don't think the hook. I don't think anyone should, or I think everyone should take a look at this, just regardless of kind of the background you were talking about for developing it. There's no reason it shouldn't be looked at by anyone who's interested. And
and honestly, real talk, we've given a thought to the fact that there's going to be a significant audience that is not particularly interested in the queer aspect of Twilight Accord. And at the same time, the setting is going to contain a lot of material that is useful, whether you're interested in the sort of underlying concept or not. The Fallen City is still going to be a vast dungeon full of monsters. We're going to be providing a lot of game content in terms of subclasses and new inspiration mechanics and all kinds of new game system toys that you can still use perfectly fine in a regular old D&D campaign. So even if somebody I would hope that folks would engage in the underlying story of Twilight Accord, and we talk about different ways to do that. Cool. But ultimately, even if you decided that wasn't any interest, there's still going to be a lot of value in it as a game product.
That's beautiful.
Two questions that I'll preface by saying Jason and I never ask for spoilers or anything like that. But that being said, do you have, are there thoughts and ideas about potentially even going beyond the initial release of the product? Do you kind of see this as
where to next?
World building and development and broadening and so on?
I think that most designers are pretty much incapable of limiting themselves to just the project in front of them. So I've already got ideas for a sequel if it does well, and it merits one. Joe and I have already said, so hey, after the clear ending point of this campaign, what would happen next? And we totally have ideas about what the next campaign would be.
Neat.
If it comes to that.
That is cool. And then just one for me, because are you still, even beyond Twilight Accord, are you working on other material?
Always.
Yourself. That's it. Okay. Well, again, that was kind of a broad-based question, but are you still doing stuff with existing IP that you've worked on, or are there other things, again, without spoilers, are there things that you're working on outside of that, or?
Well, basically my work day, work week, what have you, is I am my official title with Green Ronin is staff designer, which basically just means I write stuff. Um, and so I have a certain amount of contract hours. I work for Green Ronin, and some of it is devoted to Twilight Accord right now, but I also work on stuff for Mutants and Masterminds, for pretty much all of Green Ronin's lines in one form or another. I just did a few things for our forthcoming Cthulhu Awakens game, and just had a piece come out for the new Trades of the Expanse PDF series on bounty hunters.
Neat.
So
that's cool.
I do a little of everything.
Yeah, seriously.
So you're not bored.
No. I keep myself pretty well occupied, and of course, on top of that, I run my own Patreon to do articles and support material for Icons Superpowered Roleplaying, which was the other superhero game I designed.
Nice.
In order to kind of keep, as I said, Patreon is super helpful for me because a monthly deadline keeps me honest and keeps me producing things.
So closing question for you. When you're playing, I don't know how much time you have to play these days. When you are just playing for the joy of playing, whether it's GMing or having a PC, these days, what's your go-to?
Oh gosh, in terms of games or characters?
You tell me. I don't want to limit that. Like for you, when it's like, okay, this is the night we're gonna play. What's your ideal? Like these days?
Oh well, honestly, I'm fortunate in that my college gaming group is still together.
Wow.
and we still get together every month.
Wow. Oh my God.
We're only playing once a month now. We used to play once a week back in the day.
Is it online or is it together?
Or both? It was. We went online during the pandemic. We are back to meeting in person these days. Wow. And right now we're playing a Starfinder campaign.
Cool.
That a friend of mine is running.
Nice.
And thanks to the pandemic, I actually game a lot more than I used to.
Excellent.
Ironically, because I came to embrace the notion of gaming online, which I was originally a bit of a snob about, to be quite honest. Because being a tabletop in-person gamer for just decades, I was like, I don't know. But when it became our only option, we actually ended up adopting it, and we've done a couple of D&D campaigns, the Green Ronin staff online.
Oh, cool.
I am running against the Giants for them right now. They are in the Rift of the Frost Giant Jarl. And Alex Thomas, our assistant developer, just started a Golden Age Mutants and Masterminds campaign for us that is set in 1938, which is a lot of fun.
Oh, that's cool. That's
well,
cool.
I'm glad to hear somehow you squeeze in just a little bit of playing.
Here and there.
You're much better. I mean, doing all the writing you're doing and then being able to game. I feel like a real amateur because
that's so cool.
Just with as little as we do with the podcast about, we still don't have time for it. So,
just the fact, I mean, like Brad and I, we've been friends since college. And so, so I
about
put
the same time period.
Right. I mean, we're talking about 30 years. And so I think of that and our very small group of friends and and before, and the notion of having stayed together to play consistently. That's that's something to be proud of. That's really impressive.
And it speaks to, I mean, just as a general, hopefully as we wrap up, it just speaks to the positives of gaming. I mean,
it does.
Well, I mean, without question, some of the greatest and longest lasting friendships of my life have come through the hobby and working in the industry. So
incredible. Wow. Steve, thank you so much for spending some time with us. This is so interesting.
My pleasure.
We'd love to have you back, because as you get close to, as you continue to work on Twilight Accord,
we would love to hear more.
Love to hear more about it, because I wanted to make sure we talk about it, but we only just was tip of the iceberg.
Seriously.
Yeah. So would love to.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve Kenson, for joining us. That was a real treat for me, just talking to someone who wrote the game that in many ways kind of re-triggered interest in RPGs for me.
It really did.
So we'll have him back and talk Twilight Accord.
Yeah, we want to hear a lot more about that.
Yeah, and I would love even to hear more about, because of his work on Mutants and Masterminds, and Blue Rose is a unique, like you said, they really are, our friends at Green Ronin are unique in terms of the content they publish. And I'd love to get more into it, even beyond some of the other stuff. And, you and I have talked a bit. I always am the one that cheats a little bit, but we've been talking about some other stuff that we've been working on outside, and the age system that we've talked about at length with Malcolm Shepard. I foresee us utilizing that in some form or another going forward. So having Malcolm back will be cool.
Yeah. There will be, as we said a few weeks ago, there will be updates in the new year.
Yeah.
We'll finally get our act together and make enough progress to talk about something.
Well, I'll finally get my act together. You've got yours together and have been doing some work. I've just been schlepping along a little bit and not keeping up as much as I should. But that being said, without us talking about any further like that, because I always tend to either unnecessarily throw teasers out or spoil. What is for you in the GM corner? What has been on your desk or in your hands in terms of reading material and so on?
What's been on my mind a lot has been a few different things. Some of them related and some not. And it's about what's on the screen, and it's about what's happening in the real world. Now, as this episode, I'm going to keep this brief. I'm going to focus on one, but just to provide context, because it's going to matter. As this episode drops, it is the 29th of August. This Friday, the first episode of The Rings of Power starts September 2nd. Yep, you knew I was going to go there. Yeah. Now, dear listeners, we have not forgotten that Lower Decks returned for season 3 last week. Believe me when I say we haven't forgotten. However, that's all we're going to say about it this week, because moving forward, we are going to be doubling down on Trek, Sorry Not Sorry, for essentially a 4 to 5 episode little mini series. It's partially intentional and partly not, but we're going to be talking to and about a lot of things in Trek, on screen, at the table, in the future. So instead, what I will just talk about right now is I am really, really curious about the Rings of Power. As each trailer, kind of trailer, kind of teaser, as they come out, I think it looks better and better. I think it looks in keeping with the Steve Jackson look and feel, which I never loved the movies, but I enjoyed them a lot. And I think the look and feel and sound of the movies were in keeping with Tolkien's books. And I'm very, very interested to see the Second Age. So I can't say anything about it because it hasn't dropped yet. But I suspect
Peter Jackson.
Oh, what did I say? Steve Jackson. Oh, funny.
Yeah, not the gaming, sorry. But that's funny.
West End. Yeah. Peter Jackson. All good. I'm really curious about that, Brad. I'm trying not to get my anticipation too high, because I think what they're taking on, honestly, it's kind of like with Peter Jackson's movies. It's a Herculean task, and there are so many ways to goof it up. But I mean, what what, like Amazon has put like $14 quadrillion into this developmentally. So if the plot is as solid as the visuals, I think we're in for something. How about you? What's been on your desk?
Yeah. So that being said, we've talked about the One Ring.
Yeah.
I've still been working through that. Some of the other, well, I'm going to talk about two things. So the first one is this last week I got my gift, my box. I paid for it, not a gift, but from our friends at Modifius.
Yeah.
I picked up the Dune. I finally, I've been holding off.
Yeah.
I finally caved and got the core rule book.
And it's then gorgeous, right?
It is, yes. It again, much like the Star Trek material, absolutely well done. It's got a ribbon marker in it, just all the little details. And what's interesting is like the first section, like 90 pages or something like that, gives you a primer of the Duneverse.
Yeah.
So anyone who has not even read his books or seen the 84 movie, which I do like, is as crazy as it is.
I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. The Sleeper Has Awakened. And or even the new movie that came out.
Very much so. Yeah.
You can get into this, and I think it is a fascinating universe. You and I have talked about it.
Yep.
So more to come on that. Again, one more game that we just don't have time to play right now.
Added to the list of games we want to play and aren't.
Yeah, that aren't yet. So if anyone out there is GMing a Dune game and needs one or two additional PCs, reach out to us and let us know.
Yes.
But the other thing is, I don't think this is teasing anything, but you and I have talked about world building a lot.
Yep.
And I have been reading material, books and stuff online, and even playing a couple very low interaction games online that they aren't true high fantasy. They are fantasy meets modern.
Right.
And that has fascinated me. And so I've been doing some world building along those lines, and that's taken up some time because, and you and I have talked about this a couple times this week and last week. I'm doing some writing on it, and it spurred. I don't know that you do a lot more writing than I do. It was like a creative spurt that just kind of came from the interest in it. And again, what an imitation is the highest form of flattery. Is that the actual?
Yeah.
So I am, using some themes that I have seen elsewhere and writing, and more to come on that down the road. But that has taken up even more time, and that has left me with books sitting next to my chair that That's funny. Just need to get into more. And I even had, we've talked about it in the past, the Microscope RPG.
Yes, you sent me the link.
Yeah, I had that out because I'm using that some materials from that
for the world building.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's it for me. But other than that, we've got, like you said, we've got an arc coming. We're going to have, I think I can speak this even from a linear perspective. Jim Johnson's going to come back and talk with us. Some really cool stuff going on.
Oh, and I mean, you all know about it. It's been released, the Utopia Planitia Starfleet source book, and I'm not sure it was possible to order that faster than we both did. Pre-order it. Yeah.
You beat me to it.
You know I'm serious when I write.
It wasn't, and you have distinctly said I am limiting my purchases for the time being because I have enough material and I have other things going on.
Yeah.
But literally, I mean, there was no discussion. There was no like text back and forth.
No,
I think I'm going to get it. It was literally Jim had made sure Modifius had sent out the notification that it was available, and literally within 15 minutes you had said it's already ordered.
I mean, come on,
Yeah.
So,
I'm not knocking, because I came in a close second.
Yeah.
So
it's the beauty of role playing. It's the beauty of the role playing community, right? That there's such a wealth, there's such a plurality, there's such a diversity of options right now. I mean, how are we not in a excuse me, how are we not in a golden age? Almost the golden age of role-playing games right now. I mean, you compare, the late 80s into the early 90s, yeah, there was a lot of stuff happening. But now you look at just the sheer amount that we see from the big publishing houses and from all of these little ones. I mean, I suppose we can say, okay, so we're working on something. We've been working on something for a while. And our hope is that Dyson Mind Press will debut in the new year. We'll see. That's a teaser. We won't say anything more for now.
You gave it up, and I didn't give it up.
No, I know it's roles are reversed. I'm on a roll. Yeah. But there's just so much coming up, and there's so much out there, and it's like every week there's another game announced or released that's different than what's out there. And man, you want to play all of them. But that said, going forward, buckle up. We're gonna have a whole lot of Trek coming your way. We have interviews lined up with just the most interesting people doing the most interesting stuff in and around Star Trek. From being really part of it to being what you might call Star Trek adjacent, to being what you might call Star Trek off-Broadway, like it's a couple blocks away, but still directly relevant. Everything in between. And then rest assured, after our run, looking at Star Trek and tabletop Star Trek from lots of different perspectives, real life and play, we will be back to double down on fantasy and on other things, because we haven't even talked yet about things going on in D&D and Pathfinder and the changes that are coming from both.
Well, and I think, like you said, I think just from my perspective too, from a Trek perspective, it's also going to be a vehicle for us to talk about broader items.
Yes. Real world items. Yeah.
Real world items. So it's not purely going to be all the time, spoilers on the series. We're using it much like, and we've talked about it, much like you and Aaron writing material, and you're involved right now with writing your book on it. We're going to talk about Trek as a vehicle,
right, in
real life.
Yeah, I mean, we already have wonderful people like Laurie Ulster, with whom we just recently talked, and who do that, right? Who get into the stories and get into the shows so very well. That's not our thing. That's never been our goal, right? We want that intersection of real world and make believe, inspired by tabletop. And I think the ones upcoming are going to double down on that as well, if not better than we've done before.
Absolutely.
So science, leadership, gaming, we're going to try to work some other stuff in there. Stay tuned, everybody. As always, be well, stay well. We will see you next week.